I never thought I'd be the kind of woman to have a secret. It's not like this. For 20 years, I had been a devoted wife, a loving mother, and a woman who believed in the quiet, steady kind of love. My husband Mark and I had built a life together mortgage. Vacations, kids, the whole dream. But somewhere along the way, something shifted. Or maybe he shifted. It wasn't sudden. That's the part that kills me the most. It was a slow, almost imperceptible cooling off. At first, I chalked it up to work stress. Mark was a financial analyst, always buried in numbers and spreadsheets. He came home late, tired, distracted. But even when the busy seasons passed, the distance remained. We still shared a bed, still ate dinner together, still had the occasional night out. But intimacy, that had become a ghost. Something we used to have but barely spoke about anymore. When I tried to initiate, he'd smile, kiss my forehead, and say, "Not tonight, babe. Just tired." I told myself it was fine. That this was marriage. That after 20 years, passion naturally faded. And then menopause hit me like a wrecking ball. The hot flashes were relentless, turning my nights into a sweaty, restless mess. My moods swung wildly from irrational tears to blinding rage. And the worst part? The deep gnawing fear that I was officially old. That my best years were behind me. Mark didn't seem to notice the changes, or, if he did, he never said anything. He still kissed my cheek in the morning before heading to work, still brought me coffee on Sundays. But he didn't see me. Then I met Jason. It was at a work conference in Chicago. I had tagged along with my best friend, Lena, a marketing exec who always insisted I needed more excitement in my life. The first night, we ended up at a rooftop bar, the city glittering below us. That's where I first saw him, Jason, 26 years. Old, all confidence and charm. He was nothing like Mark. He was impulsive, bold, alive. He laughed loudly, told stories with wild gestures, and made eye contact that lasted a little too long. When he spoke to me, I felt something I hadn't felt. In years seen, he flirted. I blushed. Lena nudged me, whispering, "Holy hell, he's into you." I laughed it off, but that night, in my lonely hotel room, I thought about him. The next day, I ran into him in the hotel lobby. We got coffee, we talked. When he touched my arm, just lightly, something inside me reacted. That's how it started. Just coffee. Just conversation. Until it WASN single quotes. 2 weeks later, Jason and I were in a hotel room. I can't even remember the excuses I gave. Mark that night, probably something about a girl's night or a late meeting. Lies slipped from my tongue so easily, it scared me. With Jason, it wasn't just desire. It was revival. It was the realization that I could still be wanted. I wasn't invisible. We met every week, sometimes twice. It became a routine, predictable, mechanical, in a way. But I didn't care. I felt alive again. And then something strange happened. For the first time in over a year, my body changed. My cycle, which had been erratic and nearly gone thanks to menopause, suddenly returned. My skin looked better. My energy levels skyrocketed. 'Twas as if my body had woken up from a deep sleep. Jason joked, "Guess I'm your personal fountain of youth." I laughed, but deep down I wondered, was it him? Was it the excitement? Because suddenly, Mark noticed me again. It was subtle at first. A glance that lingered. A hand resting on my lower back in the kitchen. Then, one night, as I was getting ready for bed, he looked at me really. Looked at me for the first time in years. "You look different," he said. I froze, heartbeat hammering. "Different how?" He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. "I don't know. Just ... glowing." I turned away, pretending to adjust my earring, but inside, I was panicking. Had he figured it out? Did I leave some trace, some undeniable proof that I was no longer just his? Or worse, was he only noticing me now because someone else had? That night, Mark pulled me close in bed, his hand sliding over my hip in a way he hadn't done in years. And just like that, my world split in two. I had fought so hard for his attention, for his touch. And now, here it was, given freely. But if I let Jason go, if I returned fully to Mark, would I lose this newfound energy? Would I slip back into the version of myself who was tired, invisible, aging? Would I start to fade again? I lay awake, for hours, staring at the ceiling. Trapped between the past and the future. Between my husband and my lover. Between love and time. And for the first time since this all began, I had no idea what to do. Mark was touching me again. That should have been a victory, right? I should have felt relief, excitement, some kind of reassurance that the man I had loved for 20 years was finally seeing me again. But instead, as he traced his fingers down my spine that night, I felt fear, because I didn't know if it was me he wanted, or the version of me that Jason had unknowingly revived. For 6 months, I had been living a double life. Every Wednesday and Friday, like clockwork, Jason and I met in a sleek, overpriced hotel room on the other side of town. It was almost comical how predictable it had become. I would step out of my car, heart racing, adjust my hair in the mirror, and walk inside knowing exactly what would happen. No small talk, no awkward silences, just escape, and then I would go home, slip into bed next to Mark, and pretend that nothing had changed. Only now, everything had. Mark was noticing me again. I caught him watching me over dinner, his gaze lingering just a little longer. He started texting me during the day. How's work? Miss you. He even planned a weekend getaway. Something we hadn't done in years. I should have been thrilled. I should have taken it as a sign that our marriage wasn't as lost as I had thought. Instead, I was drowning in guilt, because every moment with Mark felt like a lie, because every time he kissed me, I thought of Jason, and worst of all, because I wasn't sure if I could ever feel this alive without the thrill of my secret life. It all came to a head one Friday night. I had just come back from seeing Jason, still buzzing from the high of it, when I walked through the door and found Mark standing in the kitchen. He had that look in his eyes again, the one that told me he wanted me. For the first time in years, my husband and my lover wanted me on the same night. "Hey," he said softly, stepping closer. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. "Hey, Day?" He reached out, fingers brushing against my hip. "You smell different." Panic shot through me like lightning. Had I forgotten to wash Jason's cologne off? Did I leave some trace of him on my skin? I pulled away too quickly, forcing a laugh. "New perfume," I lied. Mark frowned for a fraction of a second, but then he let it go, leaning in and pressing his lips against my neck. And for the first time since this all began, I didn't want it. It felt wrong. Forced. Jason had touched me just hours ago. His hands had been on my skin. And now, here was Mark, unknowingly trying to reclaim something I had already given away. I pulled back, my heart hammering. "I'm exhausted," I said quickly. "Long day at work." Mark studied me for a long moment, before nodding. "Okay," he said, stepping away. But his eyes told me he knew something was off. That night, I lay in bed next to my husband and realized something awful. I didn't know if I could ever be just his again. The next morning, Jason texted me. "Jason, can't stop thinking about last night. When are we meeting again?" I stared at the message, my stomach twisting. This had been so easy before. No feelings, no pressure, just desire. But lately, Jason had been changing. It was in the way he lingered after we were done, tracing lazy circles on my arm. The way he looked at me like I was something more than just his secret escape. The way he had started asking questions. "Why don't we ever go out? Do you ever think about leaving your husband?" At first, I had laughed it off. Jason was young. He didn't understand how real life worked, but the way he had said it last time, the way his fingers had tightened around mine when he whispered, "I want Marit," was dangerous, because deep down, I knew Jason wasn't just something I could shut off when it was convenient. And if I wasn't careful, he was going to want more than I was willing to give. That weekend, Mark and I took the trip he had planned. It was meant to be romantic. A small cabin in the mountains, just the two of us. No work, no distractions. Just us. I wanted to believe it would fix things, that if I spent enough time with Mark, if I let myself fall back into the rhythm of our marriage, I could erase the past 6 months. But that first night, as we sat in front of the fireplace, Mark reached for my hand and asked, "What happened to us?" I froze, wine glass halfway to my lips. "What do you mean?" Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I mean, I don't know. You've just seemed different lately. Happier, even, but distant." I felt my throat tighten. "You used to be exhausted. All the time," he continued. "You used to talk about feeling old, like you were losing yourself. But now, I don't know. You seem younger. Like something woke you up." A cold wave of fear washed over me. Mark was noticing everything. "You make it sound like a bad thing," I said carefully. "It's not," he admitted. "I just I guess I wish." I knew what changed. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile. Maybe I just realized life's too short to waste feeling miserable. Mark studied me for a long time before nodding. Yeah, he said softly. Maybe. But I could see it in his eyes. He knew something was off, and whether he admitted it or not, he was starting to put the pieces together. That night, Mark kissed me. Under the covers, slow and deliberate, and for the first time in months. I let myself kiss him back, but in the darkness, as his hands traced the shape of my body, I wasn't thinking about my husband. I was thinking about Jason, and as I clung to Mark, desperate to feel something, a terrifying thought crept into my mind. What if I let Jason go, and the fire goes out? Asterisk, I didn't know who I was anymore, 6 months ago. I was a woman trying to reclaim her youth, to escape the suffocating feeling of fading into the background. But now I was someone who lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wondering which man was real, the husband I had built my life with, or the lover who had made me feel alive again. Mark was trying. I could see it in the way he touched me, the way he looked at me, the way he reached for me in the middle of the night like he was afraid I might slip away. But every time he pulled me close, every time I felt his lips on my skin, I felt wrong. Because I was living a lie, and the weight of it was crushing me. Jason was becoming reckless. It started small. An unexpected call when he knew I was home. A message that popped up while I was sitting next to Mark on the couch then. One afternoon, he did something that nearly ended everything. I was in the car, parked outside the grocery store, scrolling mindlessly through my phone when I saw it. A notification. Jason liked your photo, not an old one, a new one. A picture I had posted of myself on Facebook, the one Mark had taken on our weekend trip. My heart stopped. Jason and I weren't connected. On social media, that was one of my rules. No traces, no connections, no digital footprint. I clicked on his profile. It was private. But his profile picture, it was different. And my stomach twisted when I realized why it was a selfie. Taken in my car, a flash of panic shot through me. I had taken that picture of him weeks ago, after one of our meetups, as a joke. Proof that I actually exist. He had laughed, and now it was his profile picture, public, for anyone to see. I gripped my phone, pulse hammering. Was he doing this on purpose? Was this his way of warning me, reminding me that he existed? Beyond our secret hotel rooms, needed to end this. Now that night, I met Jason in our usual spot. He was already there, sprawled across the bed like he owned the place, scrolling through his phone. He grinned when he saw me. Hey, gorgeous. I didn't sit down, didn't take off my coat. He looked up, brow furrowing. What's wrong? I swallowed the lump in my throat. This us. I can't do it anymore. Jason's grin faltered. Laura, come on. No. I cut him off. You don't get it. I can't do this anymore. He sat up, eyes searching mine. Why? Because your husband's finally paying attention again. My breath hitched. This was never supposed to be real. Jason scoffed. Real? You think I've been playing a game? He stood up, stepping toward me. I want you. I've wanted you since the moment I met you, and I know you want me to. I shook my head. It doesn't matter what I want. I have a life, a family, a husband. Jason spat. A coup. Ignored you for how long? And now that he suddenly wakes up, you're just gonna run back to him like none of this happened? I flinched at the truth in his words. Jason exhaled, sharply, rubbing a hand over his jaw. You don't get it, do you? His voice was quieter now. I thought you'd eventually see it, that we were real. That it wasn't just about sneaking around. I closed my eyes. Don't do this. Don't make this harder than it already is. When I opened them, Jason was staring at me, bleeding. Tell me you don't feel anything for me, he said. Say it, and I'll walk away. The words hovered on my tongue. I don't, but I couldn't say them, because they weren't true. When I got home that night, Mark was waiting for me in the living room. He didn't say anything at first. Just watched as I took off my coat, his fingers tracing the rim of his whiskey glass. I forced a smile. Hey. Mark took a slow sip of his drink. Where were you? My stomach dropped. Lena's, I lied. She was having a rough night. Mark nodded slowly, setting the glass down. That's funny, he said, his voice even. Because I ran into Lena earlier. She didn't mention anything about needing company. Ice crawled down my spine. I tried to stay calm. Maybe she didn't want to cut the crap, Laura. Mark's voice was sharp now, his jaw clenched. I know. The room tilted. No, what? Mark stood up, closing the distance between us in 2 slow steps. I know, Laura. His eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw it: pain, betrayal. Anger, he knew. He had known for a while. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Mark exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. God, I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that I was being paranoid. But it was there. The way you changed. The way you pulled away from me. Well, the sudden revival. A sharp, bitter laugh escaped. Him, Jesus. I actually thought maybe I was doing something right again. He shook his head. But it wasn't me, was it? Tears blurred my vision. Mark, who is he? I swallowed, throat burning. It doesn't matter. Mark's jaw tensed. Who is he, Laura? I closed my eyes. Silence stretched between us, thick and suffocating. Then, quietly, Mark whispered, "Is he why you came back to life?" I flinched, the words cutting deeper than I ever thought possible. I could have lied. I could have said no. Could have told him that Jason had meant nothing. But I didn't, because for all the lies I had told, I couldn't bring myself to tell this one. Mark let out a slow, hollow laugh. That's what I thought. He stepped back, running a hand through his hair, his breath unsteady. For the first time in 20 years, I saw my husband breaking in front of me. And the worst part? I had done this. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the empty space where Mark used to sleep. He hadn't said another word. He had just grabbed his keys and walked out the door. I had spent so long fighting against time, against the fear of fading, of losing myself. But now, as I lay there, I realized something worse than aging, worse than invisibility. I had lost Mark, and I wasn't sure if I could ever get him back. Mark didn't come home that night, or the next, for 20 years. I had known exactly when my husband would walk through the door. The sound of his keys hitting the counter, the rhythm of his footsteps. In the hallway. Now, silence filled those spaces. A void that pressed down on my chest like a weight I couldn't shake. I had shattered something, and I didn't know if it could be repaired. I spent the first night in a haze, staring at my phone, waiting for a message, a call, something. But it never came. Instead, I got a text from Jason. "Jason, did you tell him?" I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. He had no idea what had just happened, what kind of storm I had just walked into. Or maybe he did. Maybe that's why he was reaching out. I typed a response, then deleted it. I couldn't talk to him. Not now. Not after what I had seen in Mark's eyes. Instead, I buried my phone under my pillow and closed my eyes, praying that when I woke up, this would all be a bad dream. But in the morning, Mark's side of the bed was still empty, and reality crashed down like a hammer. By the third day, the silence was unbearable. I tried to go about my day like everything was normal. Folded laundry, made coffee, answered emails, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every shadow in the house felt like a ghost of what used to be Dot. Then, just before noon, I heard the front door open. I froze, breath catching in my throat. Mark stepped inside, looking exhausted. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair disheveled, like he hadn't slept. He didn't meet my eyes as he walked past me, straight into the kitchen. I followed, my pulse pounding. "Where were you?" I asked softly. He grabbed a glass from the cabinet, filling it with water. Took a sip. Then finally looked at me. "I stayed with my brother," he said flatly. I nodded, swallowing hard. "Okay." More silence. Mark set his glass down, exhaling slowly. "Are you in love with him?" The words landed like a slap. I opened my mouth. I didn't know what to say. I wasn't in love with Jason, but I couldn't say that without also admitting that part of me had wanted to be, that I had let myself believe, even for a moment, that he was an escape from the version of myself I had been running from. Mark's jaw clenched. "The fact that you even have to think about it says everything." I shook my head quickly. "No, it's not like that, Mark. It was never about him then. What the hell was it about, Laura?" His voice was sharp now, years of buried frustration rising to the surface, because I've been trying to figure it out. I've been racking my goddamn brain, wondering how I lost you when it happened, why I didn't see it coming. Tears burned behind my eyes. "It wasn't about losing you," I choked out. "It was about losing myself." Mark let out a bitter laugh. And sleeping with some guy half your age fixed that? I flinched, shame curling in my stomach. No, it made me feel like I existed again. Mark stared at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. Then, quietly, he said, "You didn't need him for that, Laura. You just needed to look at me." Something inside me cracked, because he was right. I had spent so long believing that Mark had drifted away from me, that he had stopped seeing me. But the truth was, I had stopped seeing him too. I had been so consumed with the fear of fading that I never once considered that he might have been afraid of the same thing. That maybe he had been waiting for me to come back just as much as I had been waiting for him. That night, Mark didn't sleep in our bed. He stayed in the guest room, the door shut between us. I pressed my forehead against the wood, listening to the sound of his breathing on the other side. I wanted to knock, to go inside, to beg him to hold me, to tell me this wasn't the end. But I didn't, because I wasn't sure if I deserved to. The next morning, I found him in the kitchen again. He was making coffee. Movements slow and deliberate, like he was thinking through each step. I hesitated, then stepped closer. "Mark, I need time," he said, cutting me off. He didn't look at me, just stared into his mug like it held all the answers. I swallowed hard. "Okay, more silence then?" Finally, he turned to me. "But I need to know one thing," he said quietly. "If I had been different, if I had noticed sooner, touched you more, told you how much I loved you, would it have changed anything?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut, because the truth was, I didn't know. I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell him that if he had just reached for me first, none of this would have happened. But I also knew that wasn't fair, because this hadn't been about Mark, it had been about me. And that realization scared me more than anything else. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. That's what I thought. He grabbed his keys from the counter, his movements steady, controlled. Panic clawed at my throat. "Where are you going?" He met my eyes, and for the first time since this all began, I saw something final there. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think I need to figure that out." Then, just like that, he walked out the door, and this time, wasn't sure if he was ever coming back. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where my husband had been. Jason had given me something I thought I had lost: youth, passion, energy. But in the end, it had been an illusion, because now, for the first time in my life, I had to face the truth. I had been afraid of growing old, but nothing, no affair, no secret, no fleeting passion could stop time, and now I had lost the one thing I had been trying to hold on to the most. Mark. The house felt different without him, not just empty. Hollow. Mark's absence wasn't just the lack of his voice. The missing sound of his footsteps was something deeper. The air itself felt off, like the walls were holding their breath, waiting to see if he would ever walk through the door again, for the first time in 20 years. I had no idea where my husband was, and for the first time in my life, I realized what it felt like to be truly alone. I went through the motions: work, errands, washing dishes that never seemed to pile up anymore. I had no one to cook for, no one to pick up after. At first, I thought the solitude would be freeing. It wasn't. It was suffocating. Every night, I lay in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, my fingers gripping the sheets like I could will him back. But Mark wasn't answering my calls. He'd left on his terms, and I didn't know if he'd ever decide to come back then. On the 5th day, Jason called. I let it ring. Then I let it ring again. On the 3rd call, I finally picked up. "Hey," he said, his voice smooth, familiar. The sound of something I had once wanted. But now, it just made my stomach turn. "Jason, I can't do this," I said, my voice hoarse. A beat of silence. "You already ended it. I know." I closed my eyes. I can't do this. With you? With him? With Hesterisk, my voice broke, exhaled, rubbing my temples. "I don't even know who I am anymore." Jason sighed. "Laura, I never wanted to mess up your life." I let out a humorless laugh. "Well, you did. And so did I. And now I don't know how to fix it." Another silence. Then, quietly, Jason said, "Maybe it's not meant to be fixed." Something inside me stilled. What if this wasn't a mistake? Jason continued. "What if this was supposed to happen? Maybe you weren't supposed to stay with him. Maybe this was your chance to start over." A bitter lump formed in my throat. You don't get it, I whispered. I never wanted to start over. I wanted Mark, even now, after everything, after every choice I had made. I still wanted my husband. Jason exhaled, and I could hear the shift in his tone, the quiet resignation. Then why are you here, Laura? Why are you talking to me? I swallowed hard, because you're the only thing I have left. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. And as soon as I said them, I realized how horribly true they were. Jason had never been the answer. He had been a symptom of a problem I had refused to face. A silence stretched between us, long and heavy. Then Jason let out a soft, almost knowing laugh. You know, he said, his voice oddly gentle. I always knew this would end like this. Tears pricked my eyes. Jason, you don't have to say it. He cut me off. I already know. And then, just like that, he ended the call. And I knew, without a doubt, that I would never hear from him again. That night, I drove. I didn't know where I was going, didn't have a destination in mind. I just let the road stretch out in front of me, mile after mile of open air and silence. Then, almost instinctively, I found myself pulling into the parking lot of Mark's brother's house. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, my breath coming in short bursts. And then I got out. Mark opened the door, and the moment he saw me, his shoulders tensed. He didn't say anything, just waited. I took a shaky breath. Can we talk? For a moment, I thought he would say no, but then he stepped aside. Motioning me in, the inside of the house was dimly lit, the living room quiet. Mark sat on the couch, arms crossed, watching me carefully. I swallowed hard. I ended it. Mark. Let out of breath, closing his eyes. I know. Surprise flickered through me. You do? He nodded. I saw his profile picture, the one he changed. My stomach dropped. Of course he had seen it. Mark let out a bitter laugh. He wanted me to see it. Laura, he wanted me to know he existed. I closed my eyes, shame crashing over me. I'm sorry, I whispered. God, Mark, I am so sorry. Silence then. Finally, he asked, why? I looked up, blinking through my tears. Why him? His voice was quiet, but laced with something deeper, something raw. Why did you need him to wake up? Why couldn't it have been me? A sob clawed its way up my throat. I don't know. My voice cracked. I don't know, Mark. I buried my face in my hands. I was scared. I was scared of fading, love, getting old, of losing myself. And he made me feel like I wasn't disappearing. Mark let out a slow breath, rubbing his jaw. And now? He asked. I lifted my head, my breath shuddering. Now, I just want you. Mark didn't move, didn't speak. For a long, terrifying moment, I thought it was too late. Then, quietly, he whispered, I don't know if I can trust you again. The words sliced through me like a knife. I nodded. I know. Silence stretched. Between us then, finally, Mark exhaled. But I think I want to try. I felt something in my chest crack. You do? He nodded slowly. I don't know how, Laura. I don't even know if it's possible. But I loved you once. And maybe I can learn how to love you again. A sob burst from my lips, and I clapped a hand over my mouth. Mark watched me, his eyes softer now. But if we do this, he said, we start from the beginning. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Okay. No secrets. Okay. Mark exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. And, Laura? Yeah. His voice was gentle. This time? Look at me first. And for the first time in a long, long time, I did. Asterisk, we started over. Not in the way that movies make it seem, no grand gestures. No passionate declarations of love in the rain. It was slow, painful, like picking through the wreckage of a house that had burned down, trying to see if anything was worth saving. The first night back home, Mark slept in the guest room. Neither of us talked about it. Days passed. Then weeks we didn't go back to normal because normal had been shattered. Instead, we tried something new. Dinners were quieter. Conversations more careful. We didn't touch not the way we used to. Not the way we should have. There was still distance between us. An invisible chasm that neither of us knew how to cross. But he was there, and so was I. And maybe that was enough. One evening, we were in the kitchen, washing dishes side by side. It was a small thing, but it felt significant. Mark rinsed a plate, setting it in the drying rack. Then, without looking at me, He said, "I don't think I can ever forget." I stopped scrubbing, my heart clenching. "I know, but I want to forgive." He dried his hands on a towel, exhaling. "I just don't know how." I turned to him, swallowing hard. "I don't expect you to." Mark finally looked at me. "Then why are you still here?" The answer came so easily. It almost surprised me, "Because I love you." A bitter smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "You loved me then, too." I sucked in a shaky breath. Yes, and it still wasn't enough. I closed my eyes. I know. Silence stretched between us. Then, softly, Mark said, "Tell me why, Laura." I hesitated. I had spent months running from that question, avoiding the truth of it, terrified of what it might reveal. But Mark deserved more. Because I was afraid, I admitted, afraid of what time was taking from me, afraid of what I was losing, afraid that I had already lost you. Mark's throat bobbed. "Did you?" I blinked. "What? Lose me?" I inhaled sharply, my chest tightening. "I don't know, I do." His voice was steady. "You didn't." Something inside me cracked. "But I might have lost you now," he added. A tear slipped down my cheek. "Mark, do you still want me?" His voice was raw now, unsteady. "Not because you're afraid, not because you feel guilty. Do you still want me?" I exhaled shakily, my fingers gripping the edge of the sink. "It's more than anything." Mark watched me, searching my face for something. Then, finally, he nodded, and for the first time since he left. I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. We started rebuilding, piece by piece. Some days, it felt possible. Others, it felt like trying to glue together something that had already crumbled. But we kept going. Therapy helped. Honesty helped more. I told Mark everything, not just about Jason, but about the fear I had carried, about how I had convinced myself that he would never want me the way he once did. And Mark told me things, too, like how he had seen me slipping away long before I ever met Jason, how he had felt it, how he had blamed himself. We spent months untangling the mess, dissecting what we had once been, trying to figure out if there was still something worth salvaging. And somehow, there was. One night, I was brushing my hair when I saw him watching me in the mirror. He was standing in the doorway, arms crossed, studying me the way he used to, the way he hadn't in years. I set the brush down slowly. "What?" Mark exhaled. "You still look the same." I swallowed hard. "You don't have to say that. I'm not." He stepped closer. "But you don't look like her anymore." I frowned. "Her?" "The woman who left me behind." Tears burned behind my eyes. Mark reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. "You look like my wife." My breath caught. And when he kissed me, it wasn't hesitant, it wasn't careful. It was Mark, my Mark. And for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, we would make it. We weren't perfect. Some days were harder than others. There were moments when I could see the memory of what I had done flicker across his face. Moments when I felt the weight of my choices pressing down on me. But we kept choosing each other, day after day, moment after moment. Because the truth was, I had lost something all those months ago. Not my husband, not my youth, but myself, and now. I was finally finding my way back. One afternoon, months later, we were sitting on the back porch, drinking coffee, watching the sunset. Mark reached over, threading his fingers through mine. "Are you still afraid?" he asked quietly. I glanced at him, my heart swelling. And for the first time in years, the answer was simple. No. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought? Or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comments side. Love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.